pre-analytical error, we are referring to what sample we are giving to the laboratory and what are the results which will finally be given to the patient and the clinician will interpret it based on that report. So there is a nice anecdote where it says, I am your laboratory scientist because your doctor is just guessing it out. And obviously with every aspect of life, with the good, the bad and the ugly. So defining a laboratory error, it's a defect which occurs at any particular part of the laboratory cycle, right from ordering the test, reporting the results, analyzing it, as well as in the final interpretation and the treatment which is given to the patient based on these reports. And these errors, the pre-analytical, the analytical and the post, they all have been incorporated in the ISO technical report as well. And they have been given a top priority that they should be taken care of with a particular analytical analysis. Now, every phase of the cycle is important, especially from the technical phase. When we move on to the different cycles, there are different parameters. As Einstein always said, everyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new. I think that's true. And smart people learn from their mistakes and which should not be repeated. That's all what we should learn from our mistakes. But when we look at a patient's point of view, it doesn't make a difference whether the error is due to the laboratory or a non-laboratory error. This means either there is a calibration defect, a testing defect, or whatever is the reason behind it. Overall, the laboratory errors in general percentage varies from a large variation, and this should be kept in mind. Especially coming to the pre-analytical errors, this includes the procedures performed neither in the clinical laboratory nor under the direct control of the personnel, but they are just before the sample is being collected. This means right from the blood drawing, sample collection, handling, and most important is transportation of these samples to the laboratory before analysis. Now, when we look at a different chart, we find that the major component is caused by the pre-analytical error and some part by the analytical and the post-analytical interpretation of the processes. Among the pre-analytical, there are various parameters at different levels which should be considered that where the problem arises. Now let's go into one by one. The inappropriate test request. That depends upon the clinicians how they start ordering. Again, I'll emphasize that these pre-analytical errors, they range a large part, approximately 2/3, that is from 46 to 68%. Then misidentification or misinterpretation of the patient, this is very common, especially in a larger where the turnover is quite high. Inappropriate container, the sample collection and the transportation is inadequate. Inadequate sample anticoagulant volume, which if we have a new phlebotomist, that is quite common. Insufficiency of the sample volume, sorting and routing errors, and most important is the labeling error. Now I'll deal with them one by one. But before that, what is our ultimate goal? A correct diagnosis, a complete diagnosis in a timely fashion, which will help ultimately the physician in treating the patient. Now let's come down to the type of the collection errors. These are the errors which we have already dealt with, and one by one, let's come down to it. Error in correctly identifying the patient. Most of the time, if there is a peripheral patient from a village also, common names are there. So then we need to identify them either by their father's name, their spouse's name, their house name, or something of that sort, so that there is a proper identification. If the patient is admitted, I prefer putting in a band in the hand, and so that the bed number and the patient identity is very, very identified there. Specimen tubes are unlabeled. Normally, if there is a good workload, the nursing staff or the phlebotomist, they think that Once they start collecting it, they label all the tubes together. Second important thing is they do not fix each label together. They put in a slip and they think that they will place them all together. The third method of error usually is they take a tube, they take the fixative or the label and they just roll it around, either in a piece of paper or put in a rubber band around it. This is very wrong. The tube should simultaneously be labeled so that there is no misinterpretation between the label which is attached or the requisition slip and the tube. Plus, the time of collection should also be clearly mentioned so that once it reaches the lab, the analytical time is reduced. Now, in these days of computerized labeling, we should need 3 slips for that. One for the patient label, which should be put on the requisition slip. One on the slip which accompanies or the pouch on which the patient sample is there, as well as one on the tube, different tubes, phlebotomy tubes, or the vacutainers in which the sample is being transported. This, I think everybody must have faced a problem, identification of this particular handwriting. Needless to say, this obviously gives a confusion and we cannot blame the phlebotomist or the laboratory for the type of the test which is written there also. And that is why in this era, we should recommend the ticking or the checklist system where a proper identification of the test should be done. And this will see how a proper identification AFP is seen and the same result has been interpreted. Phlebotomy errors are very common and they should be critically analyzed by a good pathologist and it should be under strict supervision. What are the various errors? The validity of the test, minimum trauma to the patient, minimizes the potential for the injury to the phlebotomist itself, and minimum chances of recollection. If we keep these in mind, the phlebotomy system will be very good and we will have a good and successful venipuncture. We all know that there are 3 antecubital fossa veins, the median cubital, the cephalic and the basilic, which are normally the preferred one. What should be avoided is to be emphasized, avoid the sites which are already under IV infusion, so that neither there is a contamination nor there is a dilution by these IV fluids. If the patient has undergone mastectomy, there is lymphocytosis, very common. There is infection usually at the site and that should be avoided. If there are some edematous areas secondary to accumulation of body fluids, that site should be avoided. Veins which are very difficult, which are not straightforward, which are hardened, scarred, they should be avoided. Usually in chronic diabetics, we normally have encountered that the veins usually they collapse, or patients undergoing strict dialysis, multiple dialysis, thalassemia. This is one common problem and judicious involvement of the vein should be, judicious selection of the vein should be there. And nowadays we have these equipments wherein the vein finders are there and very well they can be used. Even practically speaking, the mobile light gives a very good identification of the hidden veins and the direction of the veins are also very cleared out. Application of tourniquet is very important. Normally what happens is, if the tourniquet is tied too long or too close at the venipuncture, it can lead to hematoma. That too, if it's a prolonged one. The exact site is that we should put in 2 figures above the antecubital fossa, and that should be the site where the tourniquet should be tied. Tourniquet should be tied only to make the vein prominent. As soon as the needle punctures it, the tourniquet should be released and the free flow of blood should be started. Cleaning of the venipuncture site, again very important. We apply alcohol or a spirit for cleaning it out. Normally in a hurry, sometimes via that alcohol only, the blood is being aspirated. It leads to hemolysis. Plus, the patient is also irritated because of the unusual sensations which take place. These should be avoided. Now coming to the collection system. Vacutainers are definitely preferred in all aspects because they maintain a proper ratio between the anticoagulant if it is used as well as the amount of the blood that is there. Nowadays, there is an automated vacutainer system also, but smaller labs or peripheral labs, they can even use syringes for collection of the blood. The proper way is that the angle of the needle should be 15 to 30 degrees directed. It should enter in a straight line, usually from the side, and then a gradual aspiration of the blood should be there rather than a full aspiration and then air bubble coming into it. This again leads to hemolysis and improper sampling errors. Then the test collection errors, like how do we collect the sample and in what order of collection, that is also very important. Now suppose we are collecting a capillary collection, either we use a finger prick or a heel prick, especially in infants and very smaller neonates. So the side of the bottom surface of the heel should be preferred. The finger should be the third or the fourth finger rather than the index or the thumb. So these are important aspects, and if we take care that the proper collection, even by a capillary method, would be a better one. A gentle massaging very slightly, say for a few seconds before the sample collection, especially during a capillary collection, are also important, and that makes the blood supply very good in that area. For capillary, it is preferred that the first 2 drops of the blood should be wiped out because they are normally considered that the tissue fluids are contaminated with it. Then touching of the surfaces. One point of caution, sometimes we have an option that from a leftover sample from a plasma, we have to, which of the two should be ideally preferred? Serum is an ideal preference, but very occasionally plasma can be taken into consideration. Suppose we need to have a repetition of the sample or we need to come down and close down to the samples. But when we use plasma, we should consider that there are certain anticoagulants in the plasma which can alter the concentration, especially like ammonia, lithium, sodium, and potassium. So these are smaller parts, and again during the reanalysis process, these should be considered. Then interference with fibrinogen, especially in the immunoassays, metabolic and catalytic reactions like TARC polymerase in PCR, they should be important while considering plasma over a serum. This is my point of emphasis, the order of the blood in which the different vacutainers should be used, and the first collection should be of what and the last should be of what. The reason behind this logic is that whatever is in our, suppose I use sodium fluoride in the initial part, maybe that because of my needle gets contaminated with this fluoride, all the values of the blood culture, sodium citrate, clot activators, they will be affected. So this is the order right from 1 to 9. The first sample should be the blood culture, followed by for coagulation profile, then the clot activator, SFC, lithium heparin, sodium heparin, followed by EDTA, sodium fluoride, and ACD solution for blood banking. That should be the last. This is the various vacutainers in the order in which they should be collected. There is an anecdote also that can be made as per the tailoring and depending on individual choices. So it should be pasted at the venipuncture site or the phlebotomy site, and all the phlebotomy should be well trained the order in which the samples have to be collected. Second emphasis, most important again, is the transportation error. We all know arterial blood gas that should be collected immediately and retested and tested at the earliest. This should never be delayed. Rest of the things are, when we collect the sample, it should reach the laboratory, and within an hour or so, at least the sample should be separated, whether it is a serum or whether it is the plasma. And if we have coagulation profile, it should be a preferably platelet poor plasma that should be transported. This means doubly or triply centrifuging it so that all the platelets are removed out. Extremes of temperature are again very important. If we have to go in for ABG and there is a slight delay of 5 to 10 minutes, the sample should be in an ice pack. For cryoglobulin, it should be a little bit warm. But for all other routine parameters, they should be preferably in a cool temperature. And especially in temperate areas or very hot areas, the excess of temperature should be avoided. Transport container. It is not that we collect the sample in a vacuum container and leave it as such in a room. Or if we have from a peripheral center to a part to the main laboratory, it should be in a proper way. This means it should be protected from light, especially for bilirubin, because it's a very vulnerable analyte. And if it is exposed to light, there is a marked error in the reading. Transportation should be in a leak-proof plastic bag. And again, we prefer an ice bag in which they should be kept along with some separator tubes and ice packs. WHO also says that there are various analytes which need a good monitoring by a good biologist. Some of the parameters I have written, like ammonia. At room temperature, it is stable for 15 minutes. You get a good value, a reasonable value. But if you need to store it, it has to be at 4 to 8 degrees for 2 hours. In case there is a delay or in case it's an outsourced sample. Bilirubin, very unstable, but again in a refrigerator, it would be safe. So what I want to emphasize is maintaining a proper temperature, maintaining a proper transportation system gives us a good analyze, and we do not receive a complaint from the clinician that your values are variable in any manner. These are more analyzed, like PSA is being outsourced. It has a stability at room temperature of 2 hours, but when we outsource it in a very cool manner, it can extend till 1 day also. Now I'll just emphasize on some of the patient and the sample variables which affect our test result. Just a very cursory glance. Basal level at which the sample is collected. Most of the analytes, they give a best results during the fasting sample, which means a 10 to 12 hours of fasting, preferably no food, except that little liquid or water can be taken up. Specimens are affected by the time of the day, especially like a cortisol. And that is why we give it a diurnal variation. Sample collected at this particular time is this value, and according to the reference range also varies. If the patient has undergone severe exercise, stress, positioning in which the sample is collected, all these variables have little but important or pertinent effect on the patient analysis or the reports which are coming to us. If the patient is allergic to alcohol or a spirit, then what should be the ideal venipuncture site, how to clean it? We can use iodine or a betadine type of solution. But again, I'll emphasize that while using these antiseptics, they should be cleaned out rather than the needle going through that and collecting the sample. Trauma obviously should be should not be there during venipuncture, because some of the analytes like calcium, phosphorus, they are affected, and we get a spurious high or an abnormal result, especially when there is a trauma. One again important thing is vigorous shaking of the tubes after collection. Normally what happens is a newcomer, he or she tries to do the shaking out, and that affects the results. Best is to make it in an position of 8, and nowadays we even have an auto mixers available in all the labs. If the sample is hemolyzed, what are the various parameters that we have abnormal? Obviously, hyperkalemia, albumin will be raised, bilirubin, magnesium, creatine kinase, acid phosphatase. This means it was a pre-analytical error because of the phlebotomist, and the error ultimately came in the patient's reports. This is what the area is where we should avoid it. If the patient is icteric or a jaundice, there is well-known fact that some of the biochemical parameters, they will be affected, like albumin, cholesterol, glucose, protein. Now, where do we have albumin enroll? If the patient is on some medication, if the patient is on albumin binding proteins or the drugs which are transported by albumin, again we have a false reading out of these. Lipemia. In case the patient has lipemia, there would be a photometric measurement abnormality because of lipemia, because the light will be interfered and there would be an absorption problem. This should be considered. And if the patient has high lipemic condition, the sample should not be frozen. And either we ask the patient that you repeat back after 2 to 3 days and take a lighter diet instead of a lipid diet, and we'll repeat your test in case there is major discrepancies. Use of proper anticoagulant again has to be emphasized. If we need to test the sample, we need to take care that the proper serum should be there rather than an anticoagulant sample which needs to be retested. Pregnancy again has some dilutional problems as well as certain hormonal problems, hormonal changes are also there. So like estrogen, progesterone, HPL, they increase the insulin resistance and there is a development of gestational onset diabetes. So these problems can occur, especially if there is a pregnancy. So a proper history during the pre-analytical phase are also important. Then if we are measuring the trace elements, pregnancy should be considered. The GFR, alkaline phosphatase, alpha fetoprotein, hormone binding proteins, they all are important and should be considered. Age, definitely it depends on which age, and that is why the reference range of each particular age should be considered. I'll give a very good example like alkaline phosphatase. In a growing child, the ALP values are 3 times more than in a healthy adult. So when we write a reference range, it should be very clearly mentioned at what particular age we are dealing with. Decrease in glucose tolerance with age, we all know. Menstruation has certain hormonal errors hormonal variation can occur. Which day we are collecting the sample, all should be considered. Alcohol consumption, we all know it changes the hormonal value, the drug value. Use of caffeine also changes the free fatty acids. Smoking, they are known to be a hemoconcentration type of thing, wherein the hemoglobin varies, the TLC, the RBC, and the mean corpuscular volume, they are there. Now, considering all these pre-analytical errors, what should be our message? The prevention of these errors should never be there. The most important being the phlebotomy. A proper phlebotomy education should be given to each and every newcomer or a new joiner. There should be a continuing education wherein on a dummy piece, they should be trained out how to trace the vein, in what circumstance, which needle particular to be selected and how to do it, how to properly put in a dress, how to use gloves during, and even with gloves, how to seal the veins properly, the technology. This again is a newer system, the barcoding system, which should be there. Each sample, if we do a barcoding, the chances of error are reduced. But provided this barcode is put on simultaneously in all the tubes as well as the requisition slip simultaneously, rather than waiting that all the collection should be there and then we'll put it out. So maintaining a proper quality control, continuing education, and effective collection system can very well prevent everything. One more thing is a well coordinated interdepartmental cooperation, right from the clinician who writes the test, who does the test, that is the pathologist or the laboratory person, as well as who is finally interpreting it, are important. So this all will lead to a good quality control. And finally, I would like to conclude saying a good and effective integration between automation and information system needs to be done, which will greatly affect the pre-analytical error. And definitely, yes, there are certain anecdotes. The doctor says, nonsense, your hysterectomy was a complete success. But the patient said, sir, I came in for a tonsillectomy.